10,000 years is a long time. It is long enough for mountains to wear down and rivers to change their paths. It is long enough for languages to die and new ones to be born. And it is long enough for the truth to become legend, and for legend to become myth. The humans who spread across the galaxy had forgotten where they came from. They called themselves the Dispersed, and they lived on thousands of worlds under thousands of different suns. Some had grown tall and thin on low-gravity planets. Others had developed thick skin to survive harsh radiation. A few had even changed the color of their blood to breathe different kinds of air. But they were all still human, even if they no longer remembered it. The Galactic Concord was their government. It was a slow and careful thing, built on treaties and trade agreements and endless meetings. The Dispersed were proud of it. They had learned to solve problems with words instead of weapons. They believed this made them civilized. Earth was just a story now. Old Terra, the grandmothers called it when they wanted to scare children. A dead world, the historians said. Destroyed in the Exodus Wars when humanity first left for the stars. No one went there. No one even knew exactly where it was anymore. The coordinates had been lost, or hidden, or both. Then they came. They came from beyond the galaxy's edge, from the dark space between stars where nothing should live. Their ships were the size of moons. Their harvester machines could strip a planet bare in weeks. They did not talk. They did not negotiate. They did not even seem to notice that the things they were killing could think and feel and dream. The first world they took was called New Helsinki. 12 million people lived there. The Conquered sent diplomats in fast ships, carrying messages of peace and offers of trade. They did not respond. The diplomats' ships were taken apart piece by piece, while the diplomats were still alive inside them. The second world was called Brightness. The third was called Hope's Landing. The fourth, fifth, and sixth fell so quickly that most people did not even learn their names before they were gone. The Conquered sent its fleet. The fleet was large and modern and crewed by brave people who had trained for years. They destroyed it in 3 hours. They did not even slow down. Panic spread through the dispersed worlds like fire through dry grass. People who had never held a weapon tried to build defenses. Governments that had never fought a war tried to organize resistance. Nothing worked. They kept coming, patient and relentless, like a machine that had no off switch. On the Conquered's capital world, a young archivist named sat alone in the deepest basement of the central library. She was supposed to be cataloging old files, the kind of boring work that no one else wanted to do. Instead, she was reading stories. They were very old stories. They came from corrupted databases that had been and for thousands of years. Most of them were nonsense now, just broken words and missing pages. But some of them still made sense, and what they described was strange. The stories talked about something called the Sleeper Protocol. They said that before the Exodus, when humans still lived on one world, their leaders had made a plan for the worst possible future. They had taken the greatest warriors, the generals, and the most dangerous minds from all of human history. They had rebuilt them, improved them, and put them to sleep beneath the Earth's surface. The sleepers would wake, the stories said, when humanity faced extinction. Brought her findings to the Conquered Council. They laughed at her. Fairy tales, they said, children's stories. We need real solutions, not myths. But one council member did not laugh. Her name was Admiral, and she was very old. Her grandmother had told her stories about old Terra, stories that sounded very much like what had found. Admiral was also desperate. She had seen the reports. She knew the Conquered could not survive another month. Find it, Admiral told. Find Earth. Find these sleepers. It is the only chance we have left. The expedition was small. Just 3 ships, crewed by volunteers who knew they probably would not come back. They followed clues hidden in old songs and ancient star maps. They jumped through wormholes that had not been used in. They traveled to parts of the galaxy that had been forbidden since before anyone could remember. And after 3 weeks of searching, they found it. Earth was not dead, It was hiding. The planet looked like a frozen rock from space, covered in ice and clouds of gray dust. But when the expedition's scanners cut through the interference, they found something incredible. Deep beneath the surface, power stations hummed with energy that should have run out thousands of years ago. Machines worked in perfect silence, maintaining systems that the dispersed could not even understand. And at the center of it all, buried under kilometers of rock and ice and ancient technology, were the stasis chambers. There were thousands of them, row after row after row, stretching into the darkness like a city of glass coffins. Inside each one lay a human body, perfectly preserved, waiting. The expedition team found the control room after hours of searching. The instructions were simple, written in a language so old that only their translation computers could read it. The sleepers had been waiting for a signal, a call for help that would tell them humanity needed them again. Looked at her team. They were scared. She was scared too. They had no idea what would happen when they pressed the button. The beings inside those chambers were not their ancestors. They were something else entirely, something older, something that had been built for war. "We do not have a choice," said. "If we do not do this, everyone dies anyway." She pressed the button. The lights in the chamber changed from blue to gold. A sound like breathing filled the air, the sound of thousands of lungs taking their first breath in 10,000 years. The glass coffins began to open, one by one, their seals hissing as ancient air mixed with new. The first sleeper to sit up was a man with dark skin and eyes like black stones. He looked at and her team, studying them the way a wolf studies sheep. Then he spoke, his voice rough from 10 of silence. "How bad?" he asked. "Swallowed hard. Very bad. An enemy we cannot stop. They have taken dozens of worlds. They will take all of them if we cannot find a way to fight back." The man smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting a very long time for a fight. "Good," he said. "Wake the others. We have work to do." All around them, more chambers opened. More sleepers rose, stretching muscles that had not moved in 10,000 years. They looked at each other with recognition, old friends and old enemies united by a common purpose. They looked at the dispersed with something that might have been pity or curiosity or hunger. History had woken up, and it was angry. Part 2: The Old Ways. The first thing the sleepers did was ask questions. They wanted to know everything. How many ships did the conquered have? How did the weapons work? Where were the enemy's supply lines? What was the morale of the civilian population? How fast could the factories produce new equipment? The conquered officials tried to answer, but they quickly realized something troubling. The sleepers were not asking these questions to learn. They were asking to teach. Every answer revealed how much the dispersed had forgotten about war. "You have no reserves," said a woman with gray hair and cold eyes. Her name, the record said, was based on someone called Sun. She spoke like every word cost her money. "You have no fallback positions. You have no deception plans. You attack where the enemy is strong and defend where they are not. This is not strategy. This is suicide with extra steps." The conquered admirals bristled at her words, but they could not argue. Everything she said was true. The sleepers took command. There was no vote, no debate, no careful consideration of everyone's feelings. They simply started giving orders, and somehow everyone obeyed. It was like a spell had been cast over the dispersed, a spell of competence and certainty that they had not felt since the war began. The first real battle came 3 weeks later, near a system called the Broken Reach. They had sent a harvester fleet to consume a mining colony there. 50,000 people lived on those stations. Under the old conquered strategy, they would have been evacuated and abandoned. The sleepers had a different idea. The man who planned the battle was a reconstruction of someone called Hannibal. He had a wide smile and a way of looking at problems that made other people uncomfortable. When the conquered admirals showed him the enemy fleet's position, he did not look at where they were. He looked at where they would need to go. They need fuel, Hannibal said. Everything needs fuel. Where do they get it? The answer, after much research, was a depot 3 systems away. It was heavily defended, far from the front lines, and considered untouchable. Perfect, Hannibal said. That is where we will hit them. He took a small fleet through a collapsing wormhole that every navigator said was too dangerous to use. Half the ships did not make it through, but the ones that did arrived right on top of the fuel depot, catching the defenders completely by surprise. The battle lasted less than an hour. The depot burned for days. When the harvester fleet at the Broken Reach tried to continue its attack, it ran out of fuel halfway there. The ships drifted helplessly in space, and the conquered fleet picked them apart like children pulling wings off flies. It was the first real victory against the dispersed celebrated. The sleepers did not. This changes nothing, Sun's reconstruction said. We have won one battle, they have won dozens. We must win every battle from now on. They only need to win once more. The war continued. The sleepers introduced tactics that the dispersed had never seen. They created fake fleets made of empty ships and bright lights to draw the enemy's attention. They spread rumors through captured communication networks, making different parts of the enemy fleet distrust each other. They attacked supply lines, communication hubs, and sensor stations instead of fighting the main fleet directly. A man whose template came from someone called Khan did not command ships at all. He commanded information. Within weeks, his teams had learned to read the signals. Within months, they had learned to send false signals of their own. The enemy commanders started receiving orders that contradicted each other. They started seeing threats that did not exist. They started making mistakes. Another sleeper, a woman based on someone called Yisun Sin, specialized in ambushes. She studied the enemy's formation patterns until she knew them better than the enemy did. Then she designed killing zones in asteroid fields and nebulae where the numbers counted for nothing. Entire enemy squadrons flew into her traps and never flew out again. The tide began to turn, slowly at first, then faster. They stopped advancing. Then they started retreating. For the first time since the war began, the dispersed had hope. But hope was not the only thing the sleepers brought. The dispersed began to notice things. Small things at first. The way the sleepers talked about casualties as numbers instead of people. The way they made jokes about destruction. The way they seemed almost happy when the fighting was at its worst. Then came the siege of Prime. Prime was a beautiful world. It had oceans and forests and cities that had taken centuries to build. 200 million people lived there. When they invaded, the conquered tried to evacuate, but the enemy moved too fast. The people were trapped, hiding in bunkers and underground shelters while the harvesters prowled above. The Sleeper High Command met to discuss options. The meeting was supposed to be private, but a young dispersed officer named Myra managed to listen in. What she heard made her blood run cold. The atmospheric processors are the key, Hannibal was saying. If we destroy them, the air will become unbreathable within hours. The occupation force will die. So will the 200 million civilians, another sleeper pointed out. Yes, Hannibal said, but the alternative is letting them keep the planet. They will use its resources to build more ships. Those ships will kill far more than 200 million people in the long run. The math is clear, Sun's reconstruction agreed. It is an acceptable loss. Myra could not stay silent. She burst into the room, ignoring the guards who tried to stop her. Acceptable, she shouted. Those are people. They are not numbers on a screen. They have families. They have dreams. They trusted us to protect them. The sleepers looked at her with expressions she could not read. Hannibal tilted his head like a curious dog. And what would you have us do? He asked. Let the enemy grow stronger. Wait until they have enough ships to finish us all. Sentiment is a luxury, child. We do not have the resources for luxury. Myra stood her ground. She was shaking, but she did not back down. "We did not wake you to become what we fled from," she said. "We woke you because we believed humanity could be more than its worst impulses. If we murder our own people to win, what exactly are we winning? What is left worth saving?" The room went quiet. The sleepers looked at each other. Something passed between them, some silent communication that Myra could not follow. Finally, Sun's reconstruction spoke. "She is not wrong," the old woman said slowly. "We were built to protect humanity. If we destroy what makes humanity worth protecting, we have failed our purpose." "Then what do you suggest?" Hannibal asked. "The math does not change just because we do not like it." "Then we change the math," Yisun Sin's reconstruction said. "We find another way. We always found another way before. That is what made us legends, is it not? Not that we killed. That we won when winning seemed impossible." The debate went on for hours. In the end, the sleepers chose a different plan. It was harder. It was riskier. It would cost more of their own soldiers' lives. But it gave the people of Prime a chance. Myra walked out of that meeting as a different person. She had seen something important. The sleepers were not monsters. They were tools, shaped by a brutal past to do brutal things. But they could still choose. They could still learn. And maybe, just maybe, the dispersed had something to teach them too. Part 3: History Woke. The Battle of Prime became the turning point of the war, though not in the way anyone expected. The sleepers designed a new plan, one that did not require killing the people they were supposed to save. It was complicated. It was dangerous. It required perfect timing and coordination between forces that had never worked together before. The dispersed volunteers trained alongside sleeper veterans. They learned to move like ghosts. They learned to fight in ways that their peaceful ancestors had forgotten. The attack came from 3 directions at once. A dispersed engineering team used technology they had invented themselves to create a temporary shield around the civilian shelters. A sleeper strike force dropped from orbit, cutting through the perimeter like a knife through paper. And a combined fleet engaged the enemy ships in space, keeping them busy while the ground operation unfolded. It worked, not perfectly, not without cost. Thousands of soldiers died on both sides. But when the smoke cleared, 200 million civilians were still alive and the occupation force was not. Something changed after that. The sleepers and the dispersed stopped seeing each other as strangers. They had bled together. They had lost friends together. They had won together. That shared experience bridged 10,000 years of separation in a way that words never could. The war went on for 2 more years. It was hard, brutal, and costly. But the pattern held. Sleeper tactics and dispersed technology combined in ways that neither could have achieved alone. They who had never faced an enemy that adapted faster than they could calculate began to falter. The final battle came in a place called the Crimson Nebula. It was a vast cloud of gas and dust, red as blood, where the last major fleet had gathered. The enemy had nowhere left to run. Neither did the humans. The dispersed engineers built ships that could survive inside the nebula's radiation storms. The sleeper commanders designed attack patterns that used the nebula's interference to mask their approach. For 3 days, the combined fleet waited at the nebula's edge, watching, planning, preparing. On the 4th day, they attacked. The battle was chaos. Ships appeared out of the red clouds, fired, and vanished again before the enemy could respond. They tried to form defensive positions, but the nebula's interference meant they could not coordinate. Their greatest strength, their perfect unity, became useless. At the center of the enemy formation sat their command ship. It was massive, larger than any vessel the humans had ever built, and it controlled the entire network. Destroy it, and the enemy fleet would become a collection of mindless machines, easy prey. A young dispersed pilot named volunteered for the final attack. A sleeper warrior named Sira, one of the original Awakened, volunteered to go with him. Their ship was small and fast, designed to slip through gaps that larger vessels could not fit. "Why are you doing this?" asked as they approached the enemy flagship. "You have lived for 10,000 years. You could live for 10,000 more. Why risk it now?" Sira smiled. It was a strange expression on her ancient face, almost gentle. "We were not made to live," she said. "We were made to protect. This is what we were built for. This is why we exist." Their ship punched through the command vessel's shields and crashed into its core. The explosion tore through the enemy flagship like fire through paper. The network collapsed. 1,000,000 enemy machines went dark at once, drifting lifelessly in the red clouds of the nebula. The war was over. It took 3 more years to hunt down the remaining forces. They were scattered across dozens of systems, cut off from their command network, running on automatic. The humans destroyed them one by one, methodically and without mercy. Some called it cleanup, others called it revenge. Either way, it was necessary. When it was done, the galaxy held its breath. The sleepers still had their power. They still had their skills, their knowledge, their terrible experience. They could have done what they could not. They could have conquered the dispersed worlds, built an empire that would last forever. Some of the more fearful dispersed leaders expected exactly that. But the sleepers did not conquer. Instead, Khan's reconstruction stood before the conquered assembly and knelt. "We were made to protect humanity," he said. "We have done this. Our purpose is fulfilled." He looked up at the assembled representatives, his ancient eyes meeting theirs. "We do not wish to rule you. We wish to join you, to be part of the humanity we fought to save." It was not easy. Trust does not grow overnight, especially between people separated by 10,000 years and very different ideas about what it means to be human. There were arguments. There were misunderstandings. There were moments when the whole fragile piece threatened to collapse. But it held. The sleepers taught the dispersed how to defend themselves. They shared their tactical knowledge, their strategic thinking, their hard-won understanding of how wars are fought and won. In return, the dispersed taught the sleepers how to live in peace, how to build things instead of destroying them, how to see people as individuals instead of numbers. Some sleepers could not adapt. They were too shaped by their violent past, too used to seeing the world as a battlefield. Those few chose to sleep again, returning to their chambers beneath the earth to wait for the next crisis. But most stayed awake. They married dispersed partners. They had children. They became teachers, advisors, and storytellers. Their stories became part of every school's curriculum. Not just the victories, but the failures too, the cruelties, the mistakes, the times when humanity had been its own worst enemy. The dispersed children learned about the old world not as a myth, but as a warning and a guide. Myra became the first dispersed to be trained by a sleeper and to train sleepers in return. She spent her life building bridges between the two groups, finding common ground where others saw only differences. When she died at the age of 93, both sleepers and dispersed mourned her. The archivist who had found the sleeper protocol spent her remaining years documenting the integration. Her books became the definitive history of the period, read by generations of humans who wanted to understand how two branches of the same species had learned to become one again. 1,000 years passed. The galaxy changed. New worlds were settled. Old wounds healed. The distinction between sleeper and dispersed faded until it was just another category in the history books, like the difference between people who had lived on different continents back when humanity had only one world. Then the sensors at the galaxy's edge detected something new. Ships were coming from the void between galaxies. Not this time, something else, something larger. The response fleet that gathered to meet this new threat was vast. Thousands of ships, crewed by millions of humans who carried the combined heritage of sleepers and dispersed in their blood. They were not afraid. They had been preparing for this moment for 1,000 years, training for threats they hoped would never come. On every hull they carried a symbol. It was old, older than the conquered, older than the Exodus. It showed a sword and an olive branch crossed and intertwined. the sword for strength, the branch for peace. Together, they represented what humanity had learned the hard way through 10,000 years of separation and a war that had nearly destroyed them all. They could be monsters when they needed to be, but they chose not to be. That was their greatest strength. Not their weapons, not their tactics, not their numbers. Their ability to choose. The fleet jumped into position, facing the unknown. History had not just returned. It had woken up, looked at what humanity had become, and decided to stay. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The end.